right, hello and welcome to another expert interview where we like to bring you thought leaders and experts from across a broad spectrum of opinion. My name is John Golden from SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine and Pipeliner CRM, and today I'm joined by Jeff Tanner, who is at Old Dominion University's School of Business. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. Good to be with you.
Yeah, and we've been lucky enough to talk to some people involved in academics and research recently, which is an area that I think is going to have a growing impact on sales in general going forward. And so I thought today we would talk to Jeff about the work that you've done on customer strategy over the years. So, you know, for the uninitiated, what do you mean by customer strategy?
It's the process by which we develop I'm going to take a little bit of a different view probably than what you might get in your MBA class. But, for me, strategy is how you think the world works and putting into some kind of action, a plan to influence that world so that you get the outcomes that you want. So when we think about customer strategy, we think about how we think about our customers and how they want to interact with us, relate with us, what values they're looking for, what benefits they're looking for, and how can we develop action plans to deliver on that so that we can both can gain from that.
So there's been a lot of talk, particularly over the last number of years, about the change in buyer behavior and the balance of power between the buyer and the seller that the internet and access to information has created. And everybody now says, you have to be really buyer focused. You have to, and you have to accommodate that process. But a lot of it to me sounds a little bit like lip service in some ways. What are some of the things that you have seen where people really get this and know how to do it, or how can they do it?
I think you're right. I think there's a lot of lip service paid to it, and I think it's a function of a number of different things. But I will say that there are very few that are getting everything right, because there are so many tools and avenues to customers that didn't exist a decade or a little bit more than that ago. So some are very good at some parts of it, and others are better at others. But so I think one of the most interesting I've seen is what the Pedowitz group is doing in terms of aligning the marketing and sales together. And what I really, back in the day, the idea was marketing creates a lead, throws it over to the transom, and the salespeople go out and they either close it or they don't close it, or in most cases ignore it. And that's the way that it was. We're well past that era of marketing being that top part of the funnel or above the funnel, and now being a partner all the way through the funnel. Because that's the way customers are behaving now. They're not coming into the funnel and only dealing with sales. They're dealing with sales, and they're still interacting with the company's digital presence and going to trade shows and doing all those things as part of that process, particularly the more complex the situation gets. And so it's not, very few have really aligned it all the way through that process, all the way through onboarding, and then into retention, and then into upgrading and the next sale, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, so one of the things that we focused on a lot of Pipeliner ourselves, it's interesting that you say that, is about that seamless customer experience from prospect through to retention and advocate and beyond. One other interesting thing, I think, that's a phenomena that we're starting to see, it's great for a buyer to have access to all this information, but there comes a tipping point, right, where I found these phrases recently that have been new made-up phrases, which I love. One was infobesity, and the other one was infotoxication. Infotoxication, I think that's right. But where people are just so overwhelmed with the amount of information that they almost shut down. So how do you help, or how does sales help the prospect or the buyer who maybe is actually just overwhelmed by the amount of information they have?
I love those terms. I hadn't heard those before. Infobesity is brilliant. I particularly like that one. But the salesperson is the ultimate curator of knowledge in that relationship, and so I think that's an important role that the salesperson still has to play, and has to do so in partnership with marketing, so that the message is the same and it makes sense, and it delivers the right information at the right time, so the person can make a decision. But there is all this other information that's out there. Um, One of the interesting challenges, I was working with, talking with Verizon, one of their digital strategists, and and a challenge they have is that customers who have, say, a service need will Google it, and what happens is Google presents them with answers from other customers
Mm-hmm.
that aren't correct.
Right.
And they might be 80% correct, but it's that 20% that kills the customer. And then the customer is mad at Verizon when in fact they got bad information.
Right.
So one of the things they're trying to address is how can they be that source of information, and part of it's SEO and all those kinds of things too, but there's more to it than that. Part of it is, why are you Googling it when we have, access for you in another location that can give you the right answer? And it's because it's not as easy to use and things like that. So part of the answer then becomes making sure that customers do turn to you as a trusted source all the way through the process, but then also making it really easy for them to get what they want, because they're not in the business of buying, they're in the business of using.
Right. Yeah, you raised there's two very interesting points in that. I mean, the first one is, I mean, people have, or we've all, I'm just going to talk as if I'm not a person here, but we've all become accustomed to kind of, we want third party, right? We want third party
Right.
validation. So if ABC company tells us, whatever they do, and they have testimonials, yeah, we take them, but we would say, yeah, but you would say that. And then we tend to trust somebody over here who's written something that we have no validation about, that we don't know, as you say, whether it's true, whether it's even related to what we're talking about. So how does an organization start to redress that balance where a buyer may be, at the end of the day, relying on erroneous information? Now, obviously, third-party validation is always a good thing, but how do you redress that balance?
Yeah, and it's not just in the sales relationship, right? I mean, it's if you can imagine, in the healthcare doctor-patient relationship, it might have worked for one person, but actually, how are you going to know if it's going to work for you? And yet, we'll still take that person over our doctor? Come on.
Right.
So, part of it is building up that credibility. So how do I build up the credibility that I am the source that you need? And so I think one of the things is that it is causing salespeople to have to become subject matter experts in a different way, so that they can be that trusted partner and the curator for information.
Right.
And then the same is also true for the organizations. So, I think it's really about providing good information and building that reputation as an expert in that area, so that people will turn to you and they will trust you.
Yeah. And I think the second point that you raised, again, I think it's a critical one, is making it easy for people to find the information and consume the information about you that they need. And I do think that that's somewhere where a lot of organizations are still lagging because um, a lot of people just throw a ton of information up because they think, well, more is more, right? It's great. Let's just get it all out there. And no wonder the buyer goes to Google because they can't find it on your website, or they can't navigate it, or it's just too complex. I mean, do you think organizations are paying enough attention to how people like to consume information, and the fact that
No,
you and I probably like to consume information in different ways? Maybe there's overlap, maybe there isn't.
I don't think that they are. And I was on a website the other day, and I honestly don't remember whose it was, so I'm not trying to protect anybody. But I couldn't even find the search
Wow.
box, and so you know, I don't think we're still not thinking as customers. We don't mystery shop our own information sources, and we're too focused on the acquisition of the customer and making sure that the beginning part is right and not
Sure.
the back end. There's actually a company that does foundation repair. So they have salespeople that call on consumers for foundation repair and other construction. They've got one of the coolest systems that I've ever seen anywhere, and one of the coolest information systems for managing marketing and marketing response, so much so that other companies want to buy it. They're not willing to sell it until they can get their onboarding systems right. And to me, that's the kind of thing that we need people to do, is say, stop.
Right.
We can acquire all we want to, but if we don't have the right kinds of information available during the sales process and after the sales process in formats that are easy to get,
Hmm.
then we're going to be like the old mobile phone companies, and flushing them out the bottom as fast as we fill them up at the top. You know.
Yeah, exactly. So what other challenges do you see facing organizations and salespeople going forward when dealing with the customer as they are today?
Well, I think one of the things that's happening is that we're paying the price for the CMO making IT direct decisions. And what I've observed is, this isn't as great a term as infobesity, but what we call technology bloat,
Right.
and it's where you've got various people in the sales and marketing organization have made purchase decisions to fix point specific problems,
Hmm.
and now you have these redundant overlapping technologies that don't talk to each other, and we don't have the ability to synthesize the data in an easy way. And if we're we're the same humans that are the consumers, if it's not easy, we're not going to do it,
Hmm.
right? So we've got information about our customers, but it's here, there, and over there, and we can't get it together and make good use of it. Um, we did a study uh, about a year ago with fast-moving consumer goods and financial services and other companies that have a lot of customer data,
Hmm.
thinking that we've gotten past the data aggregation problem,
Right.
and no, we haven't. And once you start getting into the trades where you've got salespeople selling to the
Hmm.
trades, it gets even worse because all the money's been invested in all the money. I should say there there's not a lot of money, period.
Sure.
But what there has been invested in digital marketing solutions that don't integrate with what the salespeople are trying to do, and that is creating a lot of challenges for companies. I get called a lot. We've bought Salesforce.com, or we bought Pipeliners, and we can't. And we've got Marketo, and we can't get them to work together. And well, you got to think about that,
Yeah,
going
and
at the beginning.
ahead of time, exactly.
Yeah.
I think again you've touched on a great point. I think that one of the challenges that's facing all organizations right now is exactly what you're talking about, is people are producing point solutions like there's no
Mhm.
tomorrow, right?
Right.
And everybody who doesn't love a shiny new toy, right? And especially one that promises to make our lives easier, because let's face it, we're the shortcut culture nowadays, and we want everything to be easy, and we want a
And even
silver bullet.
worse, salespeople are the worst
Yeah,
customers, right? Because
yeah,
we buy stuff on the sales pitch.
yeah,
We
exactly.
like the sales pitch, we're all in. And
Yeah.
so we're the worst at picking technology because, we buy it.
Well, yeah, and
Yeah.
then you get a bunch of tools that different people are using in different ways. Maybe some people are using this tool, some people are using that tool, and there's no processes in place, and there's no, as you say,
Right.
there's no data flow in place. So I think one of the things that you probably spend a lot of time talking to people about is taking that step back and really looking at what do you really need, and do you actually have the processes in place, the efficient processes in place.
Yeah, a lot of it's around process design. And so when we're teaching sales or sales management in the undergraduate level to our students, we spend a lot of time on this notion of integrating the digital space with the personal space, and how do we build customer strategies all the way through the customer life cycle. Um, but a lot of it is about mapping those processes and aligning them with how customers want to buy, and that's really a piece that I think is missing in a lot of organizations. They'll hire experienced salespeople
Mm-hmm.
because they know a way to sell, but it's not all the same way.
Mm-hmm.
And then they layer some Salesforce automation on top of that, and don't understand why, it's not giving them the data that they need and productivity that they need.
Yeah.
And it's because they have no uniform language, no uniform sales process. And when we started off talking about customer strategy,
Mm-hmm.
and I said it's your theory of how the world works, and then you try to, well, part of that is you first have to have a common language.
Yes.
So I was in I was working with a company last week, and they're struggling with what's a customer.
Right.
Is it a person? Is it an organization? And this is a company that sells almost entirely to the Department of Defense.
Right.
So think about, well, you could say we only have one customer, the Department
Right.
of Defense, but why do we have 45 salespeople calling on all these different people then? Well, it's because we have these different customers. Well, wait a minute. So it's about language, and it's about getting the process right. And if you can't, and it has to match up with what the customer wants. And the cool thing about where we are today is that we can make adjustments. That's the whole purpose of a salesperson, right?
Mm-hmm.
I want to adjust to what you need as an individual. And as a human, I can do that better than any technology.
Right.
And as long as that's the case, I've got a role. And so, but if I try to be the same thing to everybody, then I'm not as successful.
Right.
So how can I make those adaptations to the individual, and then also reflect those in the information sources that are available to them, and that's when it's really cool and all comes together. But it starts with common definition, common process, or set of processes.
Yeah.
And
So as much as things change and evolve, there are some things that stay the same, and that
Mhm.
is that the more foundational work you do, the more you define your processes, the more you establish a common language, the greater chances are that technology will work for you.
Right.
If you just lump technology in on top of dysfunction, you're just going to get what, automated dysfunction, something like that.
Well, the other thing too, though, is that those salespeople that you've hired that are experienced may go out and implement their model, and you may enjoy success for a very long time. But then, there's only so far that can take you. And I think that's the hard part, is recognizing that, that may have worked,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not working now. And it's making that mind shift, to really being able to manage. The other thing too is that, since the dawn of time, we've not had a lot of data. We've not had a lot of technology. And so we've valued action over reflection. And this bias for action has, I think, caused folks to kind of rely less on the data. And so it makes them leery of the systems, the technology. And unfortunately, I think that also delays really being able to make the most out of, something like a pipeline.
Right. Okay, before we wrap up, I'd just like to ask you one more question.
Sure.
So obviously, you're dealing with the next generation of salespeople there with your undergrad programs, etc. Well, how different do you think they are going to be, and are they going to approach sales in a very different way, or is it going to be, a hybrid? What do you think?
Some folks may be laughing when they hear the question, because they've been hiring millennials and they already know that they're different. For one thing, they've been connected all their lives, so they're willing to be connected and connect with customers 24/7. But they want to do it with their thumbs and not with their voice. And part of the challenge is understanding when the call is needed, whether by phone or face-to-face, versus being able to text it or email it. And so I think that's one thing. They're going to be a little bit more likely to want to do the digital than face-to-face. But they're also, I think, more willing to do the inside. They're more ready to be an inside salesperson than perhaps we've seen before. The other thing is that I don't know that how much different this is in terms of motivating people. I think people have always wanted to know where they fit into an organization and want to serve purposes that are bigger. But I do know that this generation is a lot more demanding of it. And I'll give you an example. I had a student who graduated, got a job with a company that provides wellness services to other companies. And I said, "How's it going?" He goes, "I just sell flu shots." Said, "What do you mean you just sell flu shots? You're keeping people working. These are people on hourly pay, and if they don't work, they don't get paid. And because of you, they're able to provide for their families." And I talked to this manager about 60 days after that. This was last flu season. And he said, "The kid's knocking it out of the park." And it was like, all he needed to know was how what he did mattered, why it mattered. And when he knew that, it was like, wow, Katie bar the door, he was doing great.
And unfortunately, I think that's symptomatic of a bigger problem with sales in general, where people, traditionally haven't seen the value in salespeople, and salespeople have kind of devalued themselves they don't realize what a great service they bring to the community.
Right. Yeah.
All right. Well, listen, this has been a fascinating conversation, and we could probably talk about a ton of other subjects as well. But Jeff, before we go, can you just tell people a little more about yourself, about what you do, and how they can find out more information or contact you?
I'm Dean of the Strom College of Business, and been teaching sales and sales management since the mid-'80s. And there's now over almost 40 universities with sales degree programs. And I co-authored the leading textbook, Selling, Building Partnerships, with Steve Castleberry. We have about 20,000 students a year who use that book. So sales education is clearly on college campuses. And if they'd like to learn more about what we're doing or what other universities are doing, I'm always able to be reached at jtanner, the letter J, Tanner, @odu.edu.
Great. Listen, thanks again, Jeff. It's been a great conversation, and I think you're doing fantastic work, especially bringing through the next generation and getting sales programs embedded on campuses.
Thank you. I enjoy it. Thanks for this opportunity, too. It was fun.
All right. My name is John Golden, SalesPOP Online Sales Magazine and Pipeliner CRM, and that's another expert interview, and join me for another one very soon. Thank you.